Bone and even muscle has been so overlooked when it comes to healthy aging. That's beginning to change, but not fast enough. And I often hear from people who've been diagnosed with bone loss conditions like osteopenia or osteoporosis, and there seems to be a real lack of rounded, up-to-date and evidence-based information about the options for rebuilding. Yes, rebuilding bone density with or without medication. So today I'm bringing in an expert to help create this beginner's guide to rebuilding bone health. She created the kaariprehab online strength training program designed to help women improve their muscle mass and bone density at home with expert coaching. You can check out the description or my website honest.scot/rebuild for details of the program. But let's start this guide with a really important point when it comes to why bone matters.
So I think when we think about bone, it's really common that we think of it as just like the static tissue that's just kind of like creating the shape of our body, and then our muscles are doing all the action. But that's not really true. Bone is a living tissue. It's constantly being broken down and rebuilt. And so we just really want to keep that in mind. And we build our bone density up until about our mid 20s, early 30s. And what that means is that the pace that we're building bone is exceeding the pace that we're breaking it down. But then as we continue aging, that balance shifts and we start to break down bone faster than we're building it. And that happens especially as we get older, and especially for women because of that decline in estrogen as we go into peri and then menopause. So we really need to think about that bone kind of being a dynamic tissue, and the fact that there's two different cells working in tandem, and they need to try to stay as even as possible for us to maintain bone. But factors like our aging, reduction in muscle mass, strength, activity, lower protein intake, mineral or vitamin deficiency, and then even like certain medications can all impact bone density. So there's a lot of different factors at play. So when we're looking at bone health, it's kind of taking a step back and thinking about all of the different things that could be impacting it.
And this happens to, if you're not proactively tackling it, this is going to happen to all of us. It doesn't mean that we all go on and develop a bone loss condition like osteoporosis or osteopenia, but we will all lose bone density as we age, and we all lose muscle mass as we age.
Definitely. And especially if you're not actively loading and really trying
Yep.
to prevent that loss, it'll happen at a faster rate if you're not actively doing something about it. When we think about our bone health, it's not just like these separate pieces, like it's not just our bones and then our muscles. Everything is working together. Our hormones are working with our muscles, working with our bones. So if we have really high stress, that could also impact things like digestion. You might not be absorbing your minerals, your vitamins, your calories, or you will be absorbing your calories, but you might not be absorbing your vitamins and minerals as well. That can impact your bone density. You might not be sleeping as well, so you're not getting that opportunity to repair and rebuild. So every little piece of your body works together as a system. So all of those things play a role in your bone health.
So what happens when the balance in our bones starts moving against us and we begin losing density? Well, here Michaela explains how bone loss conditions are first identified and classified.
How you're going to be diagnosed is through a DEXA scan. So that's a dual X-ray machine, and it's going to measure your bone mineral density. And then that DEXA provides two different scores, a T-score and a Z-score. The T-score is what we use to diagnose osteoporosis. So that's the one we really want to focus on for today. And the T-score is going to compare your bone density with that of a healthy young adult around the age of 30. Around that age of 30 is when our peak bone density is achieved. So we're comparing what your bone density looks like to what would be like peak bone mass. And then from there, we diagnose, is it normal, is it low, or is it osteoporotic? So that comes in these little number scores. So a -1 or above would be normal bone density. And then a -1 to a -2.5 would be considered osteopenia, or more clinicians are kind of saying low bone density at this point. They're not using the term osteopenia as often, but it's the same thing. It's that same category of numbers. And then -2.5 or lower would be considered osteoporosis. But we hear all the time that people didn't get their DEXA score until they were older. So maybe in their like 60s, or even like we've heard people in their 70s got their first DEXA, and that's really late. So when we
Yes.
So when we think about that DEXA, we want to be proactive about that. You should hopefully be getting a DEXA as you're entering. I would say ideally as you're entering like perimenopause, because we see that bone density loss accelerates in those perimenopausal years. So I think it's the 3 to 5 years before your final period, which puts you into menopause. That's when that bone density loss is really accelerating. So we should be taking stock of what your bone density looks like at or before that time so we can measure it along the line as you continue to age and see if it's accelerating and you're tipping into those osteopenic or that low bone density osteoporosis kind of territory.
Yes, and it depends on healthcare systems and where you are
Mhm.
in the world and where you are in the country.
And a little bit of self-advocacy goes a long way. So if you're listening to this and you're in those perimenopause years, definitely talk to your doctor about getting a DEXA scan early, as soon as you can.
Weak bones unfortunately put us at a much greater risk of a fracture that can have a devastating impact on our health. Falls are one of the biggest reasons older adults lose their independence, and in too many cases, they can lose their lives too. After a serious fracture, particularly a hip fracture, many people just never fully recover. And fragile bones impact our health and well-being in other ways too.
So, like you said, the fracture risk is going to be the biggest thing that we're thinking about. So, when we're thinking about fractures and osteoporosis, the kind of main areas we're thinking about are going to be the hip, the spine, and then we see a lot of fractures happen in the wrists. The wrists are an area that actually lose bone density as well. And a lot of people get those they end up being diagnosed with osteoporosis because they fall, they catch themselves, and then they've got a fracture, and now they have to look
Happened
into
to
it.
my
And that's
mum.
when they,
Yeah.
yeah, and that's when they realize that they have low bone density. So those fractures are going to be the biggest thing that we're thinking about when it comes to risks for osteoporosis and low bone density. But those in and of themselves kind of have conditions associated with the fracture. So, like you said, a hip fracture can significantly reduce your independence. It can reduce your mobility. It can increase your mortality. And then a vertebral fracture, they're very common and they often go undiagnosed, unfortunately, and they can result in a loss of height. They can have chronic pain associated with them. It can reduce your mobility. Even just thinking about that change in like the spinal structure and shape, that changes like your breathing patterns. It could impact your pelvic floor health. We're seeing more connection between low bone density and pelvic floor dysfunction. And it's not that
Fascinating.
one causes the other, it's just that there's a lot of combined risk factors and systems that work together. So the two things tend to happen in tandem. And then, of course, one of the things that I really think about too is this isolation and this fear that happens when you get a diagnosis that tells you you're incredibly fragile. So we have people who might have been really active, maybe they weren't doing strength training, but maybe they were running, playing pickleball, doing all of these things, and then they get this diagnosis that tells them they're at risk of a fracture if they step off the curb wrong, and then they stop doing those things. So now they're socially isolating, they're not being as physically active, and then that has really big impacts on their health as well. It's just going to further weaken the muscles, weaken the bones, and our muscles play such a huge role in our health in terms of the metabolic health, the endocrine system health. So we just see it kind of cascade into this like wide range of health effects associated with
Yes.
osteoporosis.
One of the biggest myths around osteoporosis is that we cannot improve our bone density once it has become weak. We now know that's not the case. People diagnosed with osteoporosis will typically be offered medication by their doctors to try and improve things a little and protect bones too. Now, Michaela starts by explaining how these medications typically work and then how we can take action ourselves to help rebuild our bones.
There's three categories that I kind of break it down into just to keep it simple for myself. And the first category would be like the anti-resorptives. So I like to think of those as protecting the bone that you have. Examples of that would be something like Reclass, Prolia, Fosamax. Those are kind of the ones that we hear people mention the most often. And they work by slowing down the cells that remove old bones. So they're slowing down osteoclast activity. And what they're trying to do is tip the scales towards the bone building cells being a little bit higher than the osteoclast cells, the cells that are breaking down the bone. And then we have anabolic medications, and those are the medications that are going to build new bone. Examples of that one would be like a Forteo or a Tymolose. And
Okay.
And they're actually stimulating the osteoblasts. So they're stimulating the cells that build new bone. These tend to be reserved for people who are at a very high fracture risk or with very severe osteoporosis. Those two things do go hand in hand. And then the last kind of category would be the dual action medication. So they're doing both. They're slowing down cell breakdown and they're boosting up cell bone building. And Avidity would be the example for that one. And again, that would be reserved for someone who has very severe osteoporosis, very high fracture risk, and they tend to do like one dose of Avidity and then keep people on one of the anti-resorptive medications, so the one that's slowing
Okay.
down the bone loss. So that's the kind of tendency that we see with the how they diagnose or how they portion out those medications and who would get them. So we always say that medications are really great and there's a place for them. And it's really up to you and your provider to discuss what feels right for you in terms of if you want to go the medication route. But you really can't replace strength training because the benefits are so much more wide-reaching with the improvements in balance, posture, coordination, improving muscle tone, and then of course strength training can also impact bone health by improving bone density, stimulating those osteoblasts to lay down new cells. So medication, I think, is like a very personal choice, and some people are more hesitant towards medications in general, and other people just kind of want to throw everything they can at the diagnosis. And I think both approaches work really well, and you just have to do what feels right for you. Strength training, it changes what's happening in the cells of your bones. It tells your bones to lay down new tissue. It increases the osteoblast activity. And then it's also going to teach you movement patterns that are going to keep you safer in your everyday life. So one of the biggest risks that we see is compression fractures, which tend to happen when we're rounding forward and in a
Mm,
loaded position. So that could be like bending forward to pick up your grandchild or your dog or a heavy bag of groceries or whatever it might be. But the body is rounded forward, it's placing more pressure at the front of the vertebra. And then that pressure may result in a compression fracture. And so, one of the really cool things about strength training is we teach you how to squat, we teach you how to hinge, and those patterns become ingrained in your movement habits. And then, when you go to pick up your grandkid, you're lifting them up
mm,
with a nice long spine and you're not placing yourself
yes.
at risk. So it's not just like what's happening right in that strength training window. It's going to bleed out into the rest of your life and really impact the rest of your safety, your movement mechanics, your coordination, all of those things that reduce the fracture risk. So I think that that's something that you really want to consider too, just that you're taking charge, you're taking ownership of something, and that can be really impactful for how that feeds into your everyday life in terms of just being more active, feeling more confident, moving more, all of those things that impact your health. We're supposed to be moving our body, and our body
Yeah.
loves it. It feels good. It responds
Yes.
well to movement. It's just one of those things that, like, your body craves it. We need to be moving, whatever that looks like. But in terms of
Yeah.
bone density, it should include strength training.
Well, I do hear from a lot of people who say, I can't do that because I have an immune condition or
Mhm.
I've had previous fractures, or basically, I am too frail to do this. Now, it's my experience through my mum, who was very frail when she started,
Mhm.
that if we start gently and lightly and we build from there, we can all do this safely with the right
Mhm.
program. But you're the expert, Michaela. What's your view on that?
Yeah, I think that in this age of like social media and like short clips that are meant to grab your attention, I'm seeing that osteoporosis is trending a lot more, and bone density is a much hotter topic than it used to be. Um, but because of that, we get these like little short clips that are meant to grab your attention and be like a very
Mm,
it's brief. It's you're not getting the full context, and all we hear is train heavy for bone density. And
mm,
what that means is that they're probably looking at the Liftmore trial, which is an amazing study that proved that strength training is safe for those with low bone density, and not only safe, but an effective intervention for supporting bone health. And so I'm so happy that people are like recognizing that study and seeing that that's true. But I think that it can get lost in translation. And
yes.
lifting heavy isn't the only approach that you need to take or should take for bone health. And heavy is subjective to the person in front of you. So you can't just say heavy and have it mean 100 pounds. If someone's never strength trained in their life and they haven't been very active, maybe they're on, maybe they're older, heavy might be 2 pounds. Picking up those 2 pound weights might be heavy. So maybe
Yep.
that person just starts with a body weight sit to stand. They don't even need to
Yes.
do any weight at all. They just need to start to load their tissues in a way that's new to them. So
Yeah.
doing maybe 10 reps of a body weight sit to stand could be the perfect starting point for someone who's really untrained and just needs to just kind of dip their toes in the water and start moving. Whereas
Yes.
if you have someone maybe who's in their 40s and they've been relatively active their whole life, maybe they start with a 20-pound goblet squat if they're just starting out. Maybe they've been active, but it's been Pilates, so they're not used to a lot of weight and load, but they're still relatively strong. So they might start out with something like a 20-pound goblet squat and then progress from there. But the thing is that we can just start with what feels slightly challenging, it feels new and it feels novel, and then just build it up step by step. And
Yes.
I always tell people, we've got time. Like you have all the time in the world. You have the rest of your life to continue challenging and stepping up through
Yep.
that progressive overload. But you just start with what feels appropriately challenging and then take it from there. And that's going to look
Yes.
different for every single person.
How does the progressive nature of strength training help rebuild bone and muscle? Why is it important that we keep upping the challenge over time?
Yeah, so I like to personify our bones, and I like to just say that they get bored. So when we think about bone density or our bones, they're going to respond to mechanical forces. So that is the force of your muscles kind of pulling against your bone. That's also the actual compressive force of the load that you're holding on, creating that kind of healthy compression through the body. What's important to realize is that your body is going to respond to that mechanical force. It's also going to respond to a lack of force. So if you are not loading your bones, it has no reason to get stronger because building bone and building muscle is really metabolically expensive and your body likes to be efficient. So if there's no signal that says, "Hey, she's putting some pressure on us and we should probably get a little stronger, so if she does this again, we can stand it." If there's none of that, then your bones are going to just kind of quietly decline. Whereas if we put a little bit of pressure on the bones, we give them a little nudge, that stimulus says something interesting is happening here. Let's get a little bit stronger to withstand this because she might do it again. And once you start to kind of get that going, we need to keep progressing because if you just stay at the same level, you might not lose bone, which is great, but you might not build bone either. So we need to just kind of keep giving it that little nudge so it doesn't get bored and get stagnant. And so that progressive nature doesn't mean that you have to always be like lifting heavier and heavier and heavier. You can also progress by challenging the exercise itself. So if we use that squat as an example, you can do the body weight sit to stand. And then maybe your mobility improves and you can start to do a squat in the middle of the room and you're sitting a little bit lower than the chair.
Yes.
That's novel to your body. And then you add a little bit of load. And then let's say you like hit a point where you're like, I just don't know if I can really load this squat anymore. You could do you could do a split stance squat. You could do lunges. That's going to shift more load onto one leg, one hip, and that is novel. And then maybe you get really good at lunges and you need to elevate your front foot or your back foot. That's going to shift the tension, the pressure, the way that your muscles and bones have to respond to that load. So there's so much more than just getting heavy with progressive overload. It's changing, it's just thinking about novelty and giving your
Yes.
body something new to adapt to. So we do want to continue to challenge the weight, but we can do that through a variety of different ways, and it doesn't always have to be weight. That is the progression. Even
Okay.
just changing like your ability to change direction. So instead of always moving front to back, how does it feel to move side to side or to add a little bit of rotation into your movements? And that is novel. So there's so many different ways to think of progression outside of just going heavy forever.
As we've heard, strength training can make a huge impact to our bones as well as our daily lives, and it can be combined with another form of exercise that's been shown to be very beneficial too, and that's impact training.
there's two kind of loading patterns that we really want to be utilizing to improve our bone health. One of them is the axial load. So that's that top-down loading. And that is creating a healthy compressive force through the bones. And the bones really love compression. They respond well to compression. That's what tells them to turn on those little osteoblasts and lay down new bone. So you can think of like a overhead press. You're putting that weight overhead and it's creating that vertical line down the body. And that is going to create that axial load.
Yes.
Impact loading is essentially doing the same thing, but instead we're using the force of our body coming down onto the ground. And you can feel, if you've ever done like a little jump or anything like that, you can feel that vibration go up through your body and kind of move towards your hips, your spine. And so you're kind of sandwiching those two
Yes.
loading patterns together to target, again, the hips, the spine, primarily with those two forces. And so with impact, we're trying to get that strike of our feet meeting the floor, and then that travel of the force of our body weight hitting the ground is what's going to create those that stimulus for the osteoblast to lay down new cell or lay down new bone. And then with impact training, if you're brand new to impact, you've never done it before, you just start light. And that could be as light as marching in place and just letting your
Mm-hmm.
feet kind of hit the floor, step on the
Mm-hmm.
floor side to
Mm-hmm.
side. And then you can build it up. One of our favorite exercises that we use is a calf raise with heel drop. So you can lift
Okay.
up onto the balls of your feet, your heels come off the floor, and then you let them drop down onto the ground. And that single exercise can be modified, progressed, or regressed in so many different ways. So you can wear really cushy sneakers and do that, and you can only lift your heels a little bit and drop them down nice and
Mm-hmm.
lightly, and that would give you just the gentlest little impact just to start to kind of test the waters and see how your body responds to it. Versus if you do that for a while, you start to feel stronger, your bone density is improving, you're responding well to impact. Maybe you get all the way to the point where you're doing it barefoot. I do always recommend doing it on like a carpet or a yoga mat, just having a thin layer underneath you so you're not slamming your heels onto like a hardwood floor or something like that. Maybe you're doing it barefoot and you're lifting up higher and you're coming down harder, and that's going to create more impact. So there's so many ways to play with impact. It doesn't have to be box jumps. It doesn't have to be jumping off of a box. Especially when you're osteoporotic, you want to be mindful that you have to dose it correctly because we don't want to give your body more than it can handle. We just want to give it a little bit more than it's used to and then keep pushing that boundary.
We also hear about the importance of recovery, particularly
Mhm.
between training sessions where we are lifting weights, challenging our muscles and bones. Why do we build in recovery?
So, you can think of it this way. Strength training is a stimulus that's going to tell your body to adapt. So it's going to tell your body what needs to happen or create the shift. So in the terms of your bones, it's going to be what stimulates those osteoblasts to signal to lay down new bone. Or in the case of your muscles, it's going to create those little microscopic tears in the muscle. That sounds
Mm.
scary, but it's actually what we want. It's a good and beneficial effect of strength training. And then our recovery is the opportunity for those changes to actually take place. So our recovery includes time off from training. It includes intentional relaxation, stress management, nutrition. I lump all of that into recovery because all of those pieces play together. But that's the chance where your body actually goes in and it repairs. So it repairs those little tears and that builds bigger, stronger muscles. It goes in and it lays down that new bone, building stronger bone. And it does need, like, the reason I like to include nutrition into recovery is because it does need the building blocks. It needs that protein to kind of come in and give the amino acids that fill in the gaps on those muscles and the bones. And then we need the minerals, of course, that lay down into the bone tissue and calcify and create that healthier, denser bone. So that recovery time is when the effects actually solidify and take place. That's how I think of it.
100%. And actually, something came to mind as you were talking there when I interviewed Louise Maroon, who was one of your clients who had successfully regained bone density through your strength training program. Louise talked about the fact that she exercised every day in life for years and years and years, and still got the osteoporosis diagnosis. occurred to me, because I thought of her daily training, but the big difference there was she wasn't strength training. That was the omission. And I thought this is actually an opportune moment just to make that clear, that somebody could be daily walking, swimming, cycling, all that really good aerobic good stuff, but our bones can still suffer. And that's, I guess, because we're just not challenging the muscles and therefore the bones to the extent we want.
Yeah, so all of those activities that you just mentioned, those are more along the lines of like cardiovascular activity. And then we also just want to kind of think too, so they're challenging the cardiovascular system mostly. Of course, like running and cycling, you've got your legs, your calves, your glutes, all of those things are working as well. So it's not that it's just like purely your heart, the muscles are working as well, they all work together. But it is going to be primarily challenging the cardiovascular system. You also want to think about those activities in terms of what do we know builds bone, and that's that healthy compressive force, that axial load, and then the impact that creates that kind of same compressive force, but from the bottom up. This can get a little bit confusing because when you think of walking or running, you're thinking my feet are hitting the ground.
Yes.
Isn't that impact? And again, I'm going to kind of personify our bones here, but it's kind of, I think of it like this car alarm. So if you had a car alarm going out on outside your window, for the first 10 minutes or so, you would be very aware of it. But after 10 minutes, your brain might just start to be like, okay, that's background noise. We have to stop worrying about that because it's too much for us to manage. And so with your bones, that kind of, after a certain amount of feet hitting the ground on a run, your bones start to kind of tune it out. So
They get bored
it's
again.
not, yeah, they're getting bored. We have to keep the bones are very easily bored. We have to keep them
Yeah,
interested. So
love
for
that.
one thing, we're not providing the loading pattern that we need because we become really accustomed to gravity. So while we are getting axial load and impact in a walk or a run, it's an amount of load that we're used to. We're used to the force of gravity. We've had it on us our entire life. We've also been walking our entire life, most of us. And so we have our feet hitting the ground. That's a very non-novel stimulus. And what we need is a novel stimulus to really get the bones interested. And then we think of something like swimming, and now you're taking your body and you're putting it in water, and now it's buoyant. Now actually it's less loaded than it was when you were standing on the ground because now we're in the water and we've got that kind of deloading effect. So we've actually had quite a few swimmers come into our program, and you can kind of think of it like they've been really active, they have really strong muscles, they've got a strong heart, but their body has been spending long periods of time deloading in the water. And so that can be a kind of interesting thing to think about as well.
Now, you created the CARI program. It's designed to support women who have bone loss conditions and help them rebuild through strength training. And you also add in yoga. Why is that a helpful addition?
Yeah, so just to be very clear, yoga is not a bone building exercise. It lacks the stimulus that we need. We just talked about that, so I won't go into details on that. But it has a lot of benefits outside of bone building that help bone health. Primarily, again, we're thinking about fracture risk here. So yoga can be used to support balance and body awareness, coordination. The really nice thing about yoga is that it often takes you through different planes of movement. So you're moving through rotation and side to side and going forward and back, and you're moving in all of these different ways that a lot of traditional strength training doesn't always touch on,
Yeah.
depending on your trainer and how you're being programmed for. But a lot of strength training is very like forward and back, very kind of isolated. Whereas yoga is this really nice whole body movement that's going in a lot of different directions. That more closely mimics how we move throughout our life, and that helps us to move in our life more efficiently. It improves our balance and coordination, and then we can also use yoga to help improve our posture. So those mobility stretches for the chest, the neck, the shoulder, the emphasis on breathing to impact our rib cage position, all of that is really important. I love utilizing yoga to kind of target those really like small little postural muscles on the back of the body and build a lot of strength and stability there, in a way that you can certainly work into a strength training routine, but it becomes a little bit more of like like a mixed modality strength training routine. And then yoga has, again, that stress reduction effect for a lot of people. So it can be a really nice way to calm the body, calm the mind, support that endocrine system. And then again, we've got that whole connected body working together. So the endocrine system is going to support our bone health when it's functioning better.
In addition to exercise, there are other ways we can support our bones through our diet, select supplements, and for some, it may also include hormone therapy or HRT. And that's where Michaela begins as she talks us through these additional elements.
The way that HRT is really working is that primarily it's going to be supporting estrogen when we're talking about bone health. And estrogen declines as we go through perimenopause. And then as we continue to enter into menopause, it's going to kind of continue to go down there. Yeah. And that does cause bone loss to accelerate. So estrogen plays a role in the balance between osteoclasts and osteoblasts. It slows down that osteoclast activity, so it's slowing that bone breakdown down. And then it is supporting the survival and the function of osteoblasts, so the bones that build the cells. So you can kind of see how if that's declining, the bone would be affected. Yeah. The hormone therapy can be really effective to help reduce the bone loss, improve bone density, and then reduce fracture risk as a result of that. And, current guidelines do recognize it as a bone protective solution, but you don't have to be on HRT to see bone building benefits. There's so many different paths and so many different factors to consider when you're trying to craft your own intervention. And not everyone is suitable for HRT. Maybe they're running into barriers with insurance or finances or other things. So if for any reason HRT isn't accessible to you, you're not doomed. You have other ways of supporting your bone health and reducing your fracture risk. And we're just I feel like it's like a little bit of a broken record, but we need to focus on the other things that you can control, which is going to be your progressive strength training, adding in appropriate impact exercises, focusing on good nutrition, make sure that you're eating enough. The food that we eat are the building blocks of our muscles, our bones, our skin, our hair, everything, our organs. They are the building blocks of what keeps us a functioning human. So if you're not eating enough, that can be a huge factor in why you might not be building muscle or bone. And a lot of women are under eating. So that's something that I do like to just kind of like plant a seed, consider if you're eating enough. And then we do want to make sure that we've got adequate protein. I know protein is such a hot topic, but that is the rebuilding macronutrient. It's what's going to give you the little building blocks to repair your muscles, to lay down new bone tissue, all of those types of things.
Do you suggest a specific amount of protein? It does vary, specialist to specialist. What do you sort of suggest as a kind of minimum?
I feel like the 1 gram per pound of body weight is a pretty challenging to reach recommendation. Yes. That is very possible right now. So I do like to give people, and I think when people hear something like that, they give up because they're like, I can't, I weigh, 150 pounds. It's like to get 150 grams of protein in a day, you have to be planning every meal, every snack. You have to be really thinking about everything you put in your mouth, which if you have any kind of history with eating disorders or any kind of issues around food, that can be a little bit triggering. And so there's so many things to keep in mind when it comes to recommendations like that. So I know that there's some good research and some interesting kind of thought process around that, like 1 gram per pound of body weight that is often prescribed. And I think that if that's possible for you and it feels manageable, and I have I'm like a little bit on the heavier side for my body type because I'm very dense in muscle. So getting getting up to that weight is going to be harder for me. If you're on the smaller side, you might be able to meet that more easily. However, I do like the 1 to 1.2 grams per kilogram of body weight. I believe that that's really well researched. It's a little bit more approachable. And then if you can get above that, if you're really physically active, you're really pushing your strength training, you do want to be emphasizing that protein. But I think that is a pretty good place that's a pretty good goal to set for yourself. And then I think that, like this conversation of protein right now, it's such a big thing on social media. And I often see people really pushing towards animal-based protein, which I'm very much pro animal-based protein. It's
Hmm.
got a really nice variety of amino acids that your body needs. But when we're kind of getting pushed into using that as our primary protein source, we can really imbalance our macros. So you might end up overeating on fat, which I don't like to demonize any nutrient.
No, exactly.
I'm always like, I want to be very careful about how I use my words. But we do want things to be in balance. So if we're overeating
Mhm.
one, we're likely undereating another. And that's where we start to see, the changes in body composition, or we're not getting the results we want. We might not be giving if we're overeating protein and as a result fat, maybe we're undereating carbs and then we don't have the energy to show up to our workouts. So all of those things
100%.
really matter, and can become a little bit of a hard to give generalized advice. But I think when
Yes.
you can just hear someone say that there's no one size fits all, and that there are a lot of factors that go into what you eat and what that's going to look like for you, it kind of gives you permission to like tune out the noise a little bit and try to focus in on what feels right, to notice the
Yes.
differences in your body and the goals that you have in mind in relation to how you're eating or how you're working out, and then fine tune from there.
Finally, supplements. We hear a lot about making sure we get enough vitamin D. K2 is usually thrown in there, magnesium, and of course calcium. Um, is that the kind of stack that you would recommend?
Yeah, again, I feel like I'm a really annoying guest sometimes because I don't have like a really clear-cut answer for anything. Um, so when it comes to supplements, I'm always a little bit hesitant to be like, here's the stack, because your body is so interconnected, and when you supplement blindly, it can actually
Yes.
cause more problems than it solves. So my first piece of advice is try to get as much as you can through food. And what that is going to look like, just like very broadly speaking, is whole foods. So eat fruits, vegetables, grains, beans, high quality animal products, meat and dairy. And you're going to be covering a lot of basis with that if that's the primary components of your diet. So I would really try to focus on those whole foods, get as much of those as you can. Those are going to be really mineral rich as well. All of those foods I just mentioned are very mineral rich. They're going to help you achieve the calcium, the vitamin D, all of those kind of micronutrients that
Yes.
we need for bone health. And then really looking at what you need as an individual. So if you're lactose intolerant or you choose not to eat dairy, you might need more calcium and more vitamin D through supplementation. So you really have to kind of piece together your own stack. But I will give some like more generalized advice when it does come to bone health. You really want to be looking at minerals that support the bone. So magnesium, vitamin D, calcium, and K2, those kind of four work really well together. They all kind of feed into loops together. So those are that's a really good kind of like starting point. And then protein supplements, if your dietary protein needs aren't being met through your diet, you can add in a little bit of, a high
Hmm.
quality protein
Hmm.
powder. I generally go for like a whey that works well for me, but everybody's digestion's a little bit different. Their dietary
Yeah.
preferences are a little bit different, so feel free to adjust from there. And then the one supplement I feel like that has been a hot topic lately, so I'll just mention it here is creatine.
Oh, yes.
That
I take that.
creatine is yeah. Creatine is one of the most well-researched supplements, and I feel like it's moving away from being kind of associated as like a bro gym supplement that's really
Hmm.
only good for like the muscle growth. While that is its primary benefit, that does reach out into our bones and other aspects of our health as well. So if we have stronger muscles, that's going to impact the way that they relate to the bones, and they pull on the bones and create a stronger force through the bones, which is going to improve the density of the bones. So creatine is one of those supplements that I think is generally very safe. Always talk to your doctor if you have, like a history of kidney disorder, like issues, then you might want to discuss that with your doctor if it's appropriate. But it is generally very safe to take. It's pretty inexpensive, so that is a really nice supplement. And then the research on bone health and creatine is kind of limited right now. We don't have a lot of high quality evidence saying that it directly impacts bone health, but there might be those indirect benefits through its
Yeah.
ability to support muscle growth and function. And then we see more and more evidence coming out that creatine is really supportive of cognitive function and sleep, and it can help during periods of like sleep deprivation. And so while there's still more research that needs to be done on that, I know as we age, that cognitive function becomes more and more of something that we're thinking about. So that might be a really nice way to support yourself there as well. And then this is like a little bit, not necessarily a supplement, but kind of a supplement, but electrolytes. I think that
Yes.
they're, again, they're kind of a hot topic, but they're also kind of like slept on in a certain way when we talk about supplementation. So your minerals, electrolytes are minerals, so they're the same thing. You can use them interchangeably. They act like spark plugs, so they help the reactions, and they're not the catalyst for the reaction, but they help it happen faster and more efficiently. So if we're low on minerals, all of those reactions in the body start to slow down, and we can get imbalances in the different systems in the body. We can, minerals are really supportive of our stress response, so they help us to manage stress better. And you can make your own electrolyte drink really cheaply. You don't need to buy the powder packets. You can do coconut water and some sea salt, and a little bit of juice. And that's a really great electrolyte supplement that you can take pre or post workout or drink throughout the day just to give yourself a little bit more of that support. It's
Yeah.
providing the potassium, the sodium, and then you might get some vitamin C through the juice or something like that. So I think that electrolytes are one of those things that you can really introduce into your day kind of as a supplement, but you can also keep it really whole foods by just using coconut water and sea salt. So it doesn't have to be like a fancy supplement itself.
Thank you so much, Michaela. That's just been so helpful, wise as well, not too extreme, something that seems more manageable for all of us. I really appreciate it.
When people receive an osteoporosis diagnosis, it can feel as though their future has already been decided. But what I hope today's conversation has shown is that our bones are living tissue. That means they respond, they adapt, and for many of us, there's still far more we can influence than we once thought. My own parents are living proof that it's never too late to become stronger and reverse frailty. And you can watch our Rebuilding Mum and Dad series using the link in the description, where I'll also include more episodes around building strength. A reminder, you can find out more about the Kari Strength program that Michaela designed using the link below or on my website, honest.scot/rebuild. And while you're over on my website, scroll down to the bottom of any page and you can sign up for my monthly newsletter, where I round up all my latest content so you don't miss a thing. And for more from the Honest channel, including behind the scenes content and my new book club sharing inspirational and educational reads to support your health and wellness, you can join us as a member using the link below. If today's conversation has inspired you, I'd love to hear more from you in the comments. Have you improved your bone density through strength training, or are you looking to make a start? Let us know. But for now, until next time, thanks for being here today.